Greetings, Mr. Brooks here with yet another video for you. This time we're gonna talk about Mr. Freeze, good old Mr. Freeze. Everybody's favorite tragic Batman villain, or so they say. Now, while most people love Mr. Freeze, I also feel like most people, including the ones who love him, would agree that the character has gotten a bit repetitive over the years. He used to be a fairly basic villain, an ice-themed supervillain who wanted to freeze all of Gotham, and then of course he was reinvented in the early 90s by Batman the Animated Series, where they made him tragic and actually compelling. And that is of course the Mr. Freeze that everybody thinks of nowadays when they think of Mr. Freeze. And it was a great reinvention of the character because, as I said previous to that, he was a pretty basic villain, kinda generic. The Animated Series greatly improved upon him, and all Batman fans of course know this. However, at the same time, it made the character kinda limited. He's pretty much tied to his wife Nora now. That is his sole motivation now, pretty much. Either curing or avenging Nora. It's all about Nora. And you really can't do that much with that. How many times can you have Mr. Freeze try to cure Nora? After a while, it kinda grows a bit stale, doesn't it? Been there, done that. Give me something new. This is nowadays a common complaint with Mr. Freeze. So, what are you supposed to do? How do you solve this conundrum? How do you solve Mr. Freeze? Well, in this video I'm gonna give you three ways that I think you could do to solve Mr. Freeze. And this mainly goes for the comics, or maybe potential shows, because I still think we need a good take on Mr. Freeze, the classic Nora Mr. Freeze in a live-action movie, because I don't think what we got in Batman and Robin was all that good. So we still do need that. So, the first way you can fix Mr. Freeze, in my opinion, kill Nora, kill her off, have Victor fail at curing Nora. Fail for good. She's dead. She's gone. She's not coming back. There's no way to bring her back this time. She's gone. Permanently dead. So now there's no more finding a cure for Nora, blah 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 blah, staring at the cryogenically frozen Nora with tears in his eyes and all of that we've seen a billion times. Now Mr. Freeze is basically sort of free. Free to do whatever he wants. It's over with Nora. So what does Mr. Freeze want? Well, I don't think he'd want money or power. I think he'd just want to make people suffer, just like he's suffering. His wife is dead and she's not coming back, and he's stuck in this horrible condition, basically stuck in a refrigerator. So yeah, the guy feels pretty bad, and I think he'd want other people to feel as bad as he does. I think that'd be his motivation, if you kill off Nora permanently. He is completely cold emotionally, just as he is physically. So he'd want to make Gotham as cold as he is, so to speak. I think that with this motivation, he'd function a lot better as a long-running villain than when his motivation is solely to cure Nora. And now he'd actually be a real villain, driven by evil like the Joker or the Scarecrow, who works better than Mr. Freeze as long-running villains. But of course you'd still have that tragic backstory. Grief turned him into this. And the second way I think you can fix Mr. Freeze, reboot him. Reboot him without Nora. Cut Nora out entirely from the picture. No Nora. Nora never existed. I don't think that Mr. Freeze necessarily needs Nora to be a great character. I think he has enough on his own to be a compelling and tragic villain, actually. And I think it's pretty strange that nobody else has really realized this. Use his physical condition as his main motivation. Make him not want to try and cure Nora, but to cure himself from this condition. That's his goal, that's his motivation. That's what he wants to do. I mean, he has this horrible condition where he can't really experience anything. He is, like I said, stuck in a refrigerator. Obviously, he wants out of that. He wants to be normal again. But he doesn't have enough funds to do any type of research or the right equipment, so he has to steal it. Nobody's gonna give it to him. It's very advanced stuff. Maybe it doesn't even exist. Maybe he has to steal money to try and invent it himself. I mean, you don't get anything for free. Now, I'm not exactly sure how long this could actually work, but at least a few years you could have this Mr. Freeze. But this might get stale too after a while, just like the Nora story. That's possible, I'm not entirely sure. You could also have one story where he meets a woman and falls in love, and now he really wants to cure himself so he can be with this woman. That would be a nice one-shot thing. And finally, the third way I think you could potentially fix Mr. Freeze: completely reimagine him from the ground up. Create him as a new character. Remove everything you know about Mr. Freeze. Forget it all and just recreate him. Now this is of course very risky because it can easily fail when you completely change a character. Well, obviously you run the chance of ruining the character because you're removing what everybody knows about the character and loves about the character. And this has been done before and has failed before, like on the Batman cartoon show. They completely reimagined Mr. Freeze and it was pretty awful. So yeah, this one is very difficult to pull off, but at this point I think it's worth a shot, really, in the comics at least, to try and do this. You could at least do it for an alternate version of Mr. Freeze so you get something new. Now, what should you reimagine Mr. Freeze as? Well, I don't really know. That's up to your imagination. I'm gonna present one idea I have of how you can reimagine him. Just to give you an example, I'm not saying that this is how you should actually do it. It's just one idea I have. One idea how to make Mr. Freeze drastically different. So in this version there's no Nora. No Nora. Dr. Victor Freeze is a cryogenicist, as he always is, and he's experimenting with, well, cryogenics. He's experimenting with cold, and somehow during these experiments he manages to create a kind of entity, or releases it from another dimension or something, an ice entity. An entity made completely out of cold. Pure cold, the coldest you could possibly imagine, as cold as space. And this entity is not just cold physically, but also emotionally, completely emotionally cold. No feelings, no remorse. It is a cold killer, and it wants to make the rest of the world just as cold as it is. And obviously this entity would, just like the Batman version of Mr. Freeze, have cold powers. It can turn things cold with a mere touch or something, or shoot ice rays from its fingertips, or whatever, instead of the usual cold gun that Freeze has. You can make it into a sort of horror character, this ice monster that just wants to freeze people. You could also have Victor Freeze survive this whole ordeal and become a supporting character, helping Batman to try and stop this creature. And yeah, I guess you could theoretically throw in Nora there as well, but don't freeze her, don't cryogenically freeze her. We're done with that. We're done with that. Yeah, that's one idea I have of how you could completely reimagine Mr. Freeze from the ground up. Is it good? I don't know. Let me know down in the comments if you think this is good. It could maybe work better for an alternative story, some kind of Elseworlds thing, maybe, rather than becoming the standard Mr. Freeze. This might be too much, too big of a change. But it will certainly be something new, something we haven't seen before with the character, and we really need that. We really need that with Mr. Freeze. Because yeah, the repetitiveness is really becoming a problem for him, just like it is for characters like Man-Bat. Given the origins and motivations they have, they just can't really last long and still produce good stories. It only works for a handful of stories before it gets old. And so yeah, there you have it. My 3 ideas of how you could potentially fix Mr. Freeze. Solve the Mr. Freeze issue. Let me know down in the comments if you have any ideas of how to fix Mr. Freeze. I'd be really interested in seeing that, because this Mr. Freeze thing is becoming a bit of a problem. And of course, as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.